Hey, it's Stephanie here from Janku, and today I'm going to cover the basics in Inkscape. So, a little about Inkscape. It's a vector graphics software, and you can use it in Windows, Mac OS, which I'm using it in today, and GNU Linux. It's free and it's open source, and that is one of the reasons why I love it. So, I'm going to get started with the tools here on the side. So I'm just going to go down. The Select and Transform Objects tool allows you to select objects and resize and rotate them. If you click, hold, and drag somewhere in the canvas, you can, this imaginary little border or this, I guess this little square will hover over and it will select every object within the border. Just know that if you click, hold, and drag and you do not select the whole object, it will not select the object at all. So this is a tool you'll be using quite a bit. So I'll show you how to resize. You can resize by holding down Control and clicking on one of these diagonal arrows and moving it inward or outward, and this will maintain the proportion of the object. If you don't want to maintain that proportion, that's fine, but you can just select any of these arrows and move them as you'd like. Okay, so if we go down to the next tool, which is identified as Edit Paths by Nodes, this tool edits the nodes of the object. And when I say nodes, what I mean is the points, the editable points of an object. So you can change the sides, the corners. You can edit how the square or whatever object you have looks like. So when I use the Edit Paths by Nodes, I get different options that I didn't get with the Select tool. The Select tool gave me the option to resize and move the object. This tool, this Nodes tool, does not give me that option. I cannot move objects around with it. What I can do is I can edit the nodes. And when using the Square tool, which we will use in a little bit, you can select this round node here, and you can hold Control to maintain proportions and click and drag, and you'll notice that it rounds out the corner. That's a feature of the Square tool. Another thing it allows you to do is you click and hold. It will also allow you to resize. And if you hold Control and click and drag, it will maintain proportions. One other thing I'll add to this tool is because we used a Square tool, it's not fully an editable object. It's still a square object, which it has properties of a square that allow you to round the corners. But let's say that we want this to be just an object. Inkscape won't know if this is a square or rectangle. Let's go to Object, or actually let's go to Path and go Object to Path. And that will make this, all these corners nodes. And so we can go and we can edit this now. We can even add a node by double clicking on one of the sides of the object and adjusting anywhere we'd like. Now there's more to learn about nodes. If you come up to this menus, if you just hover over any of these node menus, you can see join selected node, break path at selected node. There's all sorts of things you can do here, but for the purposes of this tutorial, we're not going to be covering that. It's just the basics. Okay, let's move on to the next tool. We have the Tweak Objects by Sculpting or Painting. And what I like about this, I will say I hardly ever use this tool, but it is good for creating different artistic effects. So if you want to click and drag, it will push the selected object in sort of a random way. So let's go ahead and select all these objects so that when we click this scatter tool, click and drag. Let's try that one more time. And now you'll notice that wherever I hover, it's going to push the objects. You can play around with these different modes, which instead of dispersing the objects away from your cursor, you can make the objects come closer. You can shrink the objects that are the closest to your cursor. You can do all sorts of things. All right, let's move on to the next one. So zoom is pretty self-explanatory. The default for zoom is to zoom in. But if you'd like to zoom out, you can click and hold shift and then click with your mouse and you can click out to zoom out. So now the square tool, which is the current slide we're on. With the square tool, you can just click, hold, and drag, and you can create any rectangle. If you would like to maintain a square, the dimensions of a square, you'd hit Control and just drag diagonally and you get a perfect square. Again, with the select tool, if you select this circular node, you can click and drag. It'll round out the corners. If you would like the corners equally rounded out, you can hold Control while you pull down on that. And if you pull it down all the way, you'll just get a perfect circle. Now the cool thing about the square tool is it has its own dimensions up here. You can edit the dimensions of the square, the height, the width. Now, if you have these corners rounded and you quickly want to make them sharp, instead of going back to this nodes tool and sharpening those curves, you can actually just go back to the square tool and you can select this button here and it'll sharpen the square. How to create a circle, ellipsis, and arc. So let's first start with creating a circle. You can just click, hold, and drag. Actually, we're not on the layer right now. I'm just going to click it to get that layer. Now I can click, hold, and drag and get this circle or ellipsis. If we want a perfect circle, just hold down Control like you would the square and you'll get a perfect circle. And now for the circle tool, you have this circular node. So just like the square where you have a circular node that can round the corners, on the circle, the circular node actually cuts away parts of the circle, just like you would a pie. And then there's another option where it cuts part of the circle off. So if you come up here to the custom menu for circles, you can make sure that it's switched to a segment, a closed shape with two radii. So that's that pie there. You can have it so it's just like the circle's cut away. And if you want that circle to come back, you can just click make the shape whole again. So triangles, you might at first think that there's no triangle tool, but it's actually found in the star, the little star tool here. So if you click, hold, and drag, again, I have to make sure that I'm on the Create Triangles layer. So this is saved the last, I was creating and demonstrating this before, and whatever settings I had on this before has been saved. It looks like I was playing with the randomized selection tool here. What this does is it actually just randomizes where the corners and angles end up on the triangle or polygon or whatever you've created. Let's set that to 0. Okay, and as far as rounded, I think 0.5. All right, 0 on rounded, and I have 3 corners. And there's your perfect triangle. If you would like it to have multiple corners, you can just go up here and select more, and you'll get all sorts of polygons. Now this gives you a regular polygon, but if you select this star instead, it will pull the corners in to create that star. Here's the draw freehand lines. So think of it as you're just using a pen in your drawing. Now the reason why you're seeing these lines change so much from what I've drawn is I have gone over here to the smoothing menu, and I've increased it so much so that I've told Inkscape that whatever I draw, just make sure that it's smoothed out a decent amount. Now if I lower this, it will account for every little bump that was made by my mouse. Now the Bezier tool is, I would say, the most important tool in Inkscape. So just let's make a little space here. Alright, so I have my Bezier tool, and I'm just going to click, 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 and you got it, some kind of polygon here. Now if I want to create a curved object, I click, hold, and drag, and you'll see that it creates an arc. And I can come back to the original point that I created and drag. Make somewhat of a circle, not a perfect circle. But what this Bezier tool allows you to do, you can trace a lot of different objects. And right now I actually have my snap tool on, which is very useful with the Bezier tool, so that it snaps automatically to the corners and I can trace easily. And then I can come back with this node tool and edit all the corners to how I'd like them. Now we have a bunch of squares here. This is just a quick tutorial about selecting. I've shown you before that you can click, hold, and drag while selecting the select tool here. And by the way, if you double click on it, you can change different defaults. But let's click, hold, and drag, and I can select all these squares at once. Now let's say I want this square, this square, this square, and this square. You also have an option of holding down the Option and Command button while clicking and dragging. In this line here, everything that I pass through will be selected. It's just another way of selecting items. And like I said, I'm using a Mac, so this will be different on a PC. It's actually Shift and Alt if you'd like to use this feature. Now this tool here, Draw Calligraphy, it is very similar to drawing freehand lines, except it gives you different paint brushes you can use. So right now I'm using the dip pen, but if I put wiggly, you'll notice I get a different pattern here. Alright, let's move along. So the how to align and distribute, this is a very important feature of Inkscape. I use it quite a bit. But whenever you have objects and you want to have them equidistant, maybe you want to have all the objects line up perfectly to one side of another object, there's a way of doing that. And you can do that by going to the Align and Distribute pane right here. You can bring it up on your Mac by selecting Shift, Control A, and you get this pane here. Now I did want to say that your icons may look different than my icons on this version 0.92 of Inkscape. I had uploaded a custom icon pack, and my icons look differently, but they're the same icons, and they have the same functions that your program will have. So let's start with showing how this align tool works. So the first thing you want to know is when you're aligning objects, what are you aligning the objects to? And so this drop-down menu here says last selected. So if, let's say I select this circle and I'm holding down Shift, this is another way to select objects. You can hold down Shift and click on the different objects. By clicking all of these in this order, and then this object is last, whatever I apply, like let's say I want to align left, it's going to align to the left edges of the last object I selected, which will be this object. So let's demonstrate that. I'm going to tell Inkscape, let's align to this left side. And you'll notice only the objects I selected are now aligned to this side of the object. Let's undo that. I've hit Control Z. That's another very useful tool in Inkscape. You can also do it by the first selected. So if I change it to that, this object was the first one I selected. Going to select the same align left edges, and every object aligns, or the ones I just selected, aligns to the first one. Now I can continue doing this with different ones, to the biggest object, to the smallest object, to the page. For this tutorial, I've removed the page, but typically when you open an Inkscape, a new window, you always have a page to work with. You can do it by drawing, which the drawing is defined by everything, all the objects, all the things you've added to the page. That would encompass your whole drawing. And selection area would be only the things you've selected. Okay, so there's this other option here, treat selection as group. Let's say if you click on these two and you say, I'm treating that as a group and I want to align by drawing. So what I'm telling it is, do not move these objects individually. Keep them grouped as though they were one object and align them accordingly to the drawing. So let's select that align left, and it'll take the object on the farthest left, because that's the most left that the drawing goes, if that makes any sense. And it took the two objects, it didn't change the position of them in relation to themselves. It only moved according to the drawing as one object. So let's uncheck that. And you can just hover over and see all the different objects of how you can align the two things to each other. And again, I'm aligning this to the drawing. So when I say center on the horizontal axis, it's centering it according to if this was one object, this drawing. Now this tool here is, you see how these circles are equidistant. So let's just move them around a little bit. Let's select all of them. Now to make sure that they're in a perfect line, I'm going to go over to center on horizontal axis. So now we have them all in a good line. Actually, let's do it with the last selected. And let's try that one more time. Okay. And then I'm going to distribute centers equidistantly horizontally. So what that means is, please distribute these objects equally from the center of each of these circles. Okay, so if we take this line, let's say we take a line and we make a line on the center axis of this circle. If I were to create a line now for every circle, this is the center axis of that circle. So what I'm asking in align and distribute for this center axis, this distribute by centers, it's saying find the center of the object and distribute equally by those centers. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to delete these lines. That was just for demonstration. And I'm going just to select that, and you get perfectly separated circles. Again, there's a lot more options here, but I'm going to move on because I can spend all day on just one tool. Okay, so there's a layers video currently up on the Janku channel, but I will cover them very quickly. So on your new spreadsheet, your new once you open a new Inkscape file, you will be on a layer. It's the only layer that exists at the moment. Obviously, this is a saved file. I've added many layers here, but when you open a new file, you will be working on a layer. So within a layer, you can draw, and let me just go to the fill and stroke tool. And I actually need to cover this because this is pretty important. Okay. Why is this so dark? Okay, here we go. And I'm just going to Control D, and that makes a duplicate. And I'm going to change the color of this rectangle. Okay, so within a layer, there's a Z order as in zebra. And that's something Inkscape has identified as the positioning of an object in depth, not length or width, but in depth, where it is on the screen. So right now you'll notice that this purplish rectangle is in front or on top of the green square or rectangle. We can change the order within a layer by selecting this lower selection. We can lower it to the very bottom. We can lower it up one step. One step means, let's say there's many different rectangles here. So let's just put that, let's change the color different. Okay. So let's say I want to move this green rectangle up one, but I don't want to move it above this orange rectangle. I just want to move it above this pink one. I can go up here and I can click this rule and it will allow me to move up one step. Okay, that's cool. So let's see how we use layers. Let's go to the layers panel. You can access this by clicking Shift, Control, and L. And right now you'll notice there's a lot of layers here. We can add a new layer by selecting the plus sign, and we can delete the current layer by selecting the minus sign. Okay, so if you'd like to learn more about layers, just go to our layers tutorial on Inkscape. It can get a little bit complex for some people, and it would take me a little time to explain it, so I'd just recommend checking out that video. Okay, let's go to combining shapes in Inkscape. If we select, I've created these different squares, and if I select both squares by holding down Shift and clicking on both objects, I can go to this path menu. So I can click that menu and I can union these different objects, and that will combine them. Alright, for the text editor, it's this A right here. If we click on the canvas, let's make sure that I'm selecting the layer. Click on the canvas, I can type text, and then I can go up here and change the font. Now Inkscape comes with a lot of preloaded fonts, but if you prefer a different one, you can always download it from Google's free fonts. Now it has different selections here, the italic, bold, italic. You can change kerning. There's all sorts of settings you can play with here above. This little diamond here on the corner, that allows you to shape how the text flows. So if I were to write a little bit more here, and then I were to readjust with this diamond, it will have the text flow onto the other line. And you can go up to the selector tool and you can resize the font by clicking, holding, and dragging outward, and you'll get that different font size. You can of course change the font size while having the text editor selected, and you'll get that menu to select it there. There's the center, align center, so it has all the basic features of editing text. The next one is breaking apart objects. If you can see here, these objects were originally text. So let's recreate this here. I'm just going to type hello, and let's make that a little bigger so we can see that. So right now these are text objects, but let's say we want to break them apart. Let's go to object, or path rather, and go to object to path. And now what it's done is it's broken these different letters into their own objects, their own paths. And so now if I click and click the right mouse button, I can ungroup, and now I can move these objects individually. Also, there's another way to break apart. So I've shown you before that you can go to path and you can select union while having both objects selected. But another way of doing this is you can also select combine. This combines the two objects. If you want to separate those objects again, you can go back to path and break apart, and you'll get the objects back as they were. So gradients. Now, it would make a lot of sense for me to cover the fill and stroke toolbar. That is a very important part of Inkscape, and that's how you're going to select your colors, transparency. You can use the eyedropper on the fill and stroke panel, and the way for you to get this fill and stroke panel, you can hit Shift Control on F and F on the Mac. So right here I use HSL, but whatever you prefer. They have the RGB, CMYK, they have the color wheel, CMS. You can also, if you have a particular color that you were working on, you can put the code right here. This FF at the end stands for opaque. It's fully opaque. Let's say I want to make it transparent. I can just select anywhere here in this rectangle, and it will change the transparency, the lightness and darkness, saturation, and here's the color wheel right up here. Okay, so let's say we want to make this a gradient. It's all the rage these days. We can come here to this linear gradient, and there's already pre-made linear gradients that I've created in the past, but what we can do is we can create our own. It's by going Edit Gradient. And by selecting these different nodes, we can edit the different colors by whatever node we select. We can also change the positioning of the node, which changes the way the object is shaded. We can add more nodes, and we can change the color of those nodes and add more different colors to the object. We can also not do a linear gradient. We can do a radial gradient, which makes it radial. It works the same way as the linear, except it provides these perpendicular lines, which you can adjust and again change colors and so on. Clipping and masking I like to compare to stamping out something. So let's say that I have this square here and I want to stamp out a piece of it. So let's create a stamp, which is another square. I'm going to color it a different color just so we can see what's happening. And I'm going to stamp out just this part of the square. So let's hover this rectangle rather over the part we want to stamp out. I'm going to go to Object, Clip, Set. Actually, my bad. You have to select both objects. And let's clip that one more time. And you'll get the stamped out version of that lower rectangle. So when you're doing this, make sure that whatever you're stamping out is on the bottom. It's the bottom layer, or it's the bottom of the Z order. If you want to undo what you did, you can select Release, and it will give you both objects back. Drop shadow. So, drop shadow is very easy. Whoops. Let's create a rectangle. Now, to add a drop shadow, all you have to do is go to Filters, Shadows, Add Drop Shadow, and I like to select Live Preview so that I can play around with the different offsets here. And once I like what I see, I can hit Apply, Close, and I have a drop shadow. And that's it. That concludes Inkscape for Beginners tutorial. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below. I try to post these most Wednesdays. So if you leave a suggestion for a new video, you may very well see it one of these Wednesdays. Thank you for tuning in.